reject Boise upzone. Have you seen the yellow signs? Anybody have a sign in their yard? Okay. Well, so a group of us had been following the zoning code rewrite for over a year when it first began. And in December of last year, we decided that we didn't like the direction it was going. So we had to formalize our opposition. And that's where a group of us came together and formed Reject Boise Upzone in December of last year. It's a coalition of neighborhood activist groups, Boise working together. We brought the library and stadium initiative to ballot, Old Hill Road, Save Our Neighborhoods, and Vanishing Boise, which is a low-income housing. You know, she's really passionate about that. But we have representatives from all across Boise, from Northwest Boise, Veterans Park, North End, East End Neighborhood Association, Southeast, Vista Neighborhood Association, even South Cole. So we really have a broad perspective of all of Boise, because the zoning code rewrite affects different areas of town differently. If you're downtown, you're not going to be as affected quite as much. If you live in Southeast, where you have a lot of newer subdivisions with CC&Rs and HOAs, you're not going to be affected. Large part of the North End with large lots, historic districts, etc., you're not going to be affected. So when you get out onto the bench, West Boise, parts of Northwest, the old part of Southeast Boise, like along Boise Avenue, it's going to have a huge impact. What I hope to talk about today is just give you a little different perspective, because you've probably heard about, you know, passed unanimously from planning and zoning and city council. Hurrah! Everybody should be happy. Well, the perspective I want to give you today is from our point of view in opposition on what Boise lost. That was my feeling listening to city council at the last hearing and watching their votes. Because it's not unanimous across the city that everybody loves this. The more people find out about it, the more people oppose it. But that's not what showed up in the hearings. So we can skip the introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers from the planning and zoning hearings, neighborhood associations, how they were affected, residents put on the defensive, reduced home ownership, lack of incentives, loss of control, media bias, housing needs analysis, and specific issues. So towards the end, we'll talk about some of the specific codes, and I may have to pick up the speed a little bit. But you know, numbers from planning and zoning and the combined hearings, they had almost 1,800 pages of comments sent in. Can you imagine trying to read through 1,800 pages of comments and discerning what is valid and what isn't? Not to mention hundreds of people testifying between the two hearings. And yet when you look at the vote and the discussions, it was almost like there was no opposition, when that was totally false. There was a lot of opposition. In the 6 months that we got involved, you know, we had actively 800 people involved on our Facebook page. We've collected 2,600 emails. We distributed 400 yard signs that were specifically requested and donated. You know, $10. We asked $10 donations. Some people would give more. Some people, you know, we didn't feel like paying or really couldn't afford to pay. So there was a lot of opposition, and starting from scratch in 6 months, we were just completely amazed at how few people knew anything about this. Now, day one of the city council hearings, it was day for the neighborhood associations. And the neighborhood associations were put on the defensive because the city wanted to give them 5 minutes at a hearing. Where in this new process, there's going to be very few hearings. So when they do get to a hearing, you're talking about a big planned community, or not planned community, but a CUP, conditional use permit, planned units. It's going to be a larger project for a neighborhood association to be at a hearing. And comments from Patrick Badgett of the city council, he says, well, the city council leaders don't really represent the people in their neighborhoods. We see leaders that are elected time and again and served a long time, and we don't think they really represent their neighborhoods. And I was like, wait a minute. Neighborhood associations, leadership is elected annually, they hold regular meetings, and they live in the neighborhood. And for me, who really supported council by districts, I had red flags springing all over the place because the city council pretty much came from the north end. They don't hold town hall meetings. They don't go out to the population and ask you what your issues are. They are elected every 4 years. So I really had a heartburn with that, especially when you think about the city planner coming up and giving a presentation that's going to be anywhere from 85 to 200-page report, followed by a professional presenter, which is an attorney, architect, or planner or something, that gets 20 minutes. And here you get a neighborhood volunteer that is responding because that project is going to directly affect their neighborhood and homes. And they wanted to limit their time to 5 minutes. And 5 minutes is nothing when you get up and start trying to talk about any details. So I thought that was really off base. We ended up with 10 minutes for neighborhood associations. But again, when neighborhood associations are hearings, these are going to be big detailed projects. They're not going to be just for a duplex or a fourplex. You're going to be talking a small subdivision, something big and major that's going to need more detail in a longer time. There's also discussion about residents. Right now, when you apply for a development, you plan a permit, you have I think it's 300+ feet radius that you have to notify all property owners within that radius of where you're building. What they want to do is, you don't have to notify anybody in type 2 projects, which are allowed uses, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, allowed use, allowed form. It could be a big project, a big apartment building or a hotel or something, but if it's an allowed use and allowed form, they don't have to notify the neighbors until it's approved. And then you can appeal it, but the reality is you're probably throwing money away. You don't have an option of giving input on how the landscaping might affect you, how the windows lay out, how the design might be affecting properties directly around you. I don't know why they hate or took such a stance against citizen input on these developments. It's like we were to blame because projects take too long or something. But again, when going forward, these are going to be big projects. And can you imagine coming home, getting a note card in the mail, hey, your neighbor decided to convert his house to a 6-plex up to 3 stories high. It's been approved. You knew nothing about it. And you just put $20,000 into a backyard, back patio, kitchen, fire pit, and now you get to go out there and you're basically can be in a fishbowl. And that is what is allowed through large parts of the Bench, West Boise, all your neighborhoods. That's not a pleasant thought to me. Reduced home ownership. Throughout this, units, rental housing is highly incentivized. There is no incentives for home ownership. None. So over time, if you follow the cost of housing and how we have really lost affordable housing, it's because builders have stopped building small affordable homes. I mean, I'm not blaming them, they just have. It makes more sense for them to build 2,500 square foot homes and make a lot higher profit than to build 1,500 square foot homes. So if you avoid that market, that category of homes, you create an imbalance that we're feeling now. And over time, when you avoid building homes to be owned, what are your future generations going to buy into? It's going to be rental housing. It's going to be high density rental housing, 3-4 stories high, built up to the curb like you see on 27th. Go down to 6th and Broad downtown with the apartment, you know, maybe not that high downtown, but look on Vista, the big green building on the corner of Vista and Targhee, to where it's just a wall. You get 10 feet off the sidewalk. And that's what's coming to our older neighborhoods. And it's sold as creating affordability. Affordability for rentals. And in my experience, in 20 years, 2 surges, the more you build, properties don't get cheaper. The more properties are selling, the higher the demand for land, the higher the demand for materials, the higher the demand for labor. Costs always skyrocket. And if somebody's investing a couple $1 million into a property, they're going to build it to get a higher market rate, to get a return on investment. Loss of local control, delay the vote, it's really a huge issue for me. Because I got involved in the beginning to create city council by districts. Because Boise has been controlled by North End for a long time. And it's not their fault. You know, Boise wasn't out in West Boise, they just weren't getting out and voting. They had the power and the opportunity to vote, but they weren't. So you really saw a focus along the river, foothills, downtown. Think about all the amenities that have been built over the last 20 years. The number of parks, all greened up, ready to go. And then you go out west. Do you see any of that kind of investment out there? You just don't. So council by districts, which is going to be the first time election, all seats are going to be elected. All 6 districts would have a say in how their area grows and evolves into the future. And a huge part of that is growth and development. I can't think of anything that happens in a neighborhood that frustrates, angers people more than development within the neighborhoods. So right on the cusp of all of Boise having a more equal say in how Boise grows and evolves, that control, that ability to vote on this stuff has just been yanked out from underneath them. Because the zoning code rewrite has so many allowed uses, there's nothing you can really do about it. If somebody wants to build that there, they get to go forward with it. And that loss of control, that control just got placed right back into downtown, because the planning on even larger projects, the planning director has a lot of say in what gets approved. So my perspective of this whole process is pretty negative. Media bias. So for 6 months, we've tried to get media time. And we're not, the group of us, there's probably 10 of us, have been heavily involved in neighborhood issues for a long time. Most of us are past presidents of our neighborhood associations. There's been 2 initiatives brought to the ballot because of the people involved. And we have a broad representation across the city. So we're not just, we're not cranks. We're concerned about our neighborhoods. We understand the development process, and we're involved in our communities. Justin Core interviewed the mayor, planning director numerous times, and only referenced our sign. Don Day, Margaret Carmella, Boise Deb, they probably wrote more extensively on the whole process than anybody. Very detailed analysis. They wouldn't talk to us. Gemma Gaudette, public radio, Idaho Matters, never responded to emails. They couldn't even get on conservative radio. That's a sad perspective, especially going into this huge election year that we have. How much bias are we going to see during the election? This process was last done in the 60s. So to think of how this zoning code is going to affect Boise going into the next 50 years and not having a balanced across the board debate and discussion is pretty frustrating. It was very frustrating. So, we had resorted to social media, emails, as much posting as we could, videos, all of that. And we generated a lot of interest. But the media was definitely biased, not wanting to air our side of it. Housing needs analysis. So back in 2021, the city hired a consultant to do a housing needs analysis on how Boise was growing. Now this was created during the peak of when Boise was growing because of between the pandemic, between the riots, there was just a massive flood of people coming to Boise. And they came out, the report says they needed 2,773 units a year for the next 10 years. Now for most people, that's just a number. Since 2014, when we first came out of the recession, that was the first good year that we had good production, building permits. Since then, we've averaged 1,460 a year. So 2,773 is almost an 85% increase in annual production. Think about how much we've grown in our last two growth spurts, and think about what an 85% increase in that production is. And it's going to be close in because of the way the zoning code rewrite is. We're not going to be sprawling out the Harris Ranch and Hidden Springs and Dry Creek. It's going to be condensed. Those numbers also represent a 12% increase in Ada County building permits. They want to take away from Meridian and Cuna and bring that production into Boise. So that housing needs analysis is clearly stated what their intention is. Zoning code rewrite is the mechanism to get there. And to me, that's just, I can't imagine it. Really, I can't imagine the change that's coming. And right now, we're in a down economy, interest rates are high, inflation's high, money's hard to get, so it's really hard to say when, how quickly this is going to happen. But, big projects are sitting because of the availability of money. You can't pay 10, 12% in development money and hope to make any money on it. But somebody that has cash of $1 to $2 million, well, they can certainly start investing in infill and start creating some projects. But again, it's hard to say how quickly this will turn around. It's going to take the economy to turn around, but we've been through this twice already in the last 20 years. So what's coming is probably going to be far different or far more, it's going to be just huge. So some of the specific things that they did come out with that made changes is, I think it was 2 years ago, they had hearings on assisted dwelling units, and Airbnb short-term rentals. Out of those hearings, the people were adamantly, strongly against non-owner occupied ADUs. So the city didn't go that route. They did have a proposal that you could do non-owner occupied ADU, assisted dwelling unit, if that unit was under 60% of AMI. That is very low income. They removed both those standards. So now you can have non-owner occupied ADUs. The main housing can be non-owner occupied, the new unit can be non-owner occupied. No affordability requirements. They've increased the size of those ADUs to 900 square feet while reducing open space to 200 square feet. So when you're doing a building on a lot, they have minimum open space. The minimum yard space requirements, that was 400 square feet. You could build a 700 square foot ADU. Now it's 900, and they reduced the open space requirements. In incentives, there's two big incentives that really they affect my neighborhood. You have the transit corridors, which is Vista, Fairview, and State Street. Most of those commercial lots have been zoned to mixed use 3, which is mixed use transit. If you live within a quarter mile of any of those lots, you can qualify for up to 12 units per lot. They used to have you have to meet affordability. You'd have, depending on the number of units you had, a percentage had to be below 80% of AMI, and you had to build them sustainably. All electric, high efficiency building. They made it so it's either or, you can do one or the other. So they made it a lot easier. With these incentives also, across the city, ACHD has a master street plan that lists all the arterials and collectors. They all have different classifications of what, how big a collector it is. If you live within 300 feet of any of those collectors, you can get up to 12 units on a lot up to 3 stories high. Obviously, there's conditions that apply. You've got to have room to build that. The existing structure has to be kept. So you're adding on to the back.
But doesn't all those lots have to be a certain size too? You can't just say this is a lot, because lots vary in size.
Like I said, there are restrictions.
Yeah.
You've got to have room for it. You've got to have room for parking. So it's not every lot that's going to get 12 units. But think about Depot Bench. Think about all the large lots that are there. Most of them have room to drive down the side, so you have access to the back. There's plenty of room there to be building a lot of units. And those are allowed uses. Because all of these things are classified as allowed uses, you really don't have any recourse.
So Dave, I just wanted to give you the 5-minute warning, so if you want to take questions.
That's it anyway.
Okay, perfect.
I have a question. So on